My first idea is, I'm calling it GPT Jobseeker.
My idea is, I call it negotiate for me. Many folks don't negotiate enough. And even when they do, they don't negotiate very well.
My second idea is really simple. I actually don't know why, someone hasn't done it. Or maybe people have done it, but just not to scale.
I'm going to close off with a quick idea. I get too many crank calls and too many people that want to get a hold of me. Can someone build a AI? Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 11 of the $1 Million Ideas podcast. Today, my friend is with us in the studio today, Suga Kandiah, who is the founder of Hidden Gems Talent, an offshore talent agency that focuses on sales and marketing roles, and is here to talk about two ideas that she's pretty excited about today. With me also is my co-host, Ken, and how's everyone doing?
Very well.
Good.
Yeah.
Very well.
Have you done a podcast before, Suga? Is this your first podcast or?
Yeah, so this is my first podcast, Usman. I'm a huge fan of podcasts, so I was very excited to come on this one.
Nice. Any podcasts that you religiously listen to, or is it just like whatever?
The podcast I religiously follow is The Knowledge Project by Shane Parrish. I love that podcast. I've been listening to it for years. So that's the one podcast I typically, whenever I go for a cycle, I will tune into. And then Lex Friedman at times, Shane Parr's podcast, and then a couple of local podcasts here and there. But the one when I think, I really need a good podcast right now, it would be The Knowledge Project.
That's funny you call it Shane Parr's podcast, but it's him and Sam, right?
Sam
the
Parrish.
$1 million.
No.
No.
He's got his
Sam
own.
Parr.
Oh, this is Shane Parrish. He runs something called The Knowledge Project.
Oh, I thought you were still referring to Sean. Sean Puri.
No. I do listen to Sean Puri at times, but it's a little too. It's a bit too rah-rah for me. Whereas The Knowledge Project, it keeps me kind of centered and sane.
$1 Million podcast is very geared towards guys. I think it's much more guys listening.
Yeah, it's quite bro-y when you think about it. I think like with Shane's podcast, though, I love the way that he goes super deep on topics, and his voice is also pretty soothing. Like he has this very calm, collected way of talking, but he also gets some fantastic guests, and his little newsletter that hits every week is also really nice. I love the little 3 sort of like things that he does every week from the podcast.
And I think he asks really good questions. And like, I think, oftentimes like a guest will be speaking and a question will come to me, and then Shane will have asked that question. So he's clearly like very in tune with, okay, my job is to ask the questions that my listeners can't ask. I think he does a fantastic job at that.
He's been doing it for a while now. I haven't sort of like subscribed to his members only area. It's something that I've been tempted to a lot, but I've been relatively disappointed whenever I go behind these member only areas. I've done it with a few sort of like podcasts, but yeah, that is a good one. So our podcast is a bit different. We go slightly deep on 4 topics and 4 ideas that we bring every week with a hope that it inspires someone to get an idea, to spark off from one of the ideas that we speak about, and generally things that we're excited and would like to see exist in the world. So with that, Suga, are you ready to share your first idea?
Yeah, absolutely. So my first idea is, I'm calling it GPT Jobseeker. Not the most fancy name, but I sort of thought about how, a resume is very non-representative of a person. And what if in the future, people started programming their own GPTs, right? With all of their experiences, all of their talents, all of their personality, so that their GPTs could go around taking interviews for them. And then, the people who get the best jobs are the ones who program the best GPTs. I mean, today, the people who get the best jobs have the best resumes or kind of structured their resumes accordingly. But why not have structured GPT to go around interviewing for you? And especially in this kind of age where you see more and more employers employing AI bots to do that initial interview, I feel like candidates should have their equivalent GPTs going around taking those interviews as well. And that way, you might get better fit. You might get better fit on both sides if they're two very clinical bots talking to each other.
No, it's quite a fascinating idea. Before we jump off, did you think about from a candidate perspective, given that you're in the talent business, would you charge the candidate to get this done? Whenever they get a interview, they pay something, or how do you think you would bill for something like that?
So it's almost like, what candidates pay to a career coach, or they pay for their LinkedIn premium. So this is you sort of think about it as a toolkit, right, in their job search. You can almost even imagine, how they sometimes will build a website for themselves to showcase their portfolio. You can almost say, hey, they submit a regular resume and then it's here's a link to my GPT, talk to me. And then employers can say, all right, let me get to know Suga a little bit better. What are your hobbies? And then, the strength of your GPT will have to speak. But yes, ultimately the candidate would be the one to pay for it.
Cool.
My initial reaction, so I've thought about this a little bit before. I have a friend that's doing something a little bit along those lines, but I think where my thinking on it goes a little bit blurred is if it's going to be two AI chatbots talking with each other, why do they have to talk? For me, it's just you got a bunch of data on the candidate, you got a bunch of data on the company and what they're looking for. And it's almost like an algorithm just goes and matches the best people. Does the conversation actually need to occur? That's what I'm kind of thinking.
Yeah. I think it comes down to depth, right? I think Suga's first point was if resumes are not indicative or something. Now the whole deal is going to be, would a GPT be able to pick up things like expression or pick up, tone or demeanor of the person, is something that perhaps the video thing, because I think video interviews are a big thing now. I think a lot of companies now are making you submit 1-minute videos, and I think the screen primarily is how does this person come across, given that a lot of people are working remotely as well. But that's what I think the fidelity of video could give.
And I also think, something employers look for a lot is critical thinking skills, right? And a resume can't convey that. But if you've trained your GPT to think like you, then I feel you would need a conversation to assess critical thinking skills. Because otherwise, how would one bot be able to assess another bot's critical thinking skills? You know what I mean? I see where you're coming from. You're right. It probably will be a much shorter, very brief conversation, but I can't imagine that, everything can be captured in data point.
Yeah. No, I completely agree on that. I think training your bot, especially as the candidate, you need to invest and you need to have a conversation and it gets to know you. And I think that part is definitely a conversation. But then once the bot is educated, this whole thing of two bots talking with each other is always something that's a bit confusing to me.
I mean, it might be that a human employer will talk to a bot at some, if the bots get really good and for certain roles where someone's in super high demand, it might be that there's a human employer on one side talking to a candidate bot on the other side.
Yeah, I like that. I almost think the bot would be more honest. The person just trained their bot and it's taking a lot of data points. I almost think I'd prefer on a first screening interview to talk to the bot.
It'd be more efficient. The one person who I've seen really scale this out is Reid Hoffman. I don't know whether you guys have seen this or not, but he's created an AI clone version of him. And now this version of Reid Hoffman goes and gives full talks. It does interviews, and he can now speak every single language in the world. And he does this. It's absolutely fascinating. So I think the technology has definitely got there. And, I think in one of the earlier episodes, we covered a business called Resi.io, which I think is pulling in $2-3 million a year just to fix your resume. And I think this is a great overlay sort of like business to that business where you can get started with the basic resume. And then, like you guys said, like it can interview you. It can ask you a whole bunch of questions. It can then record video and then get that video sample. And then through those samples, you'll be able to create the bot layer. I think the upfront training and the cost of this might be a bit high. So I wonder, like, the costing model I would think of would be you do this once, it's an investment. Maybe it costs $100 or $200 to get done one time. And then anytime that your GPT is used for a thing, then I would just bill on a per use basis. And that way we get the money back initially by doing all the heavy work. And if you can charge $200, which could be a bit out of the range for most people, but at $100, we would need to probably then do quite a few to get to $1 million run rate. We'll probably have to do like 8,000 sort of like bot creations, but maybe you could do like 5,000 a month. And depending on how many interviews they get after that, you probably need to get like 3,000 to 5,000 people into this. And then you could make $1 million a year.
Yeah, I would kind of peg the amount they pay to what they pay for a LinkedIn premium, right? Just like $40, $30, $40. I think the challenge with this business is going to be getting employers to accept it. Because employers like to think they have all the leverage. And if like someone's sending a bot to them, they're probably going to be like, oh, there's going to be this feeling of, oh, you're telling me this job is not important enough for you to make time. And that's why you're sending me a bot. That's going to be the main challenge. That's going to be the main hurdle to get over, right?
What that made me think is you have a lot of the best candidates are the ones that may not be actively job searching. So maybe it's even more for them. You know, they're not going to spend their time, and they almost feel a little bit like unloyal to their employer to officially take an in-person interview. But if you want to chat with their bot, see if they're a good fit, like, here, talk to my bot.
Yeah, that could totally work. You're right. You know, talk to my bot here. I mean, it's almost, I mean, the way I see it is the resume is going to become obsolete. All right. My bot will tell you everything you need to know about me. So yeah, there's nothing wrong with sharing your resume to folks, right? And yeah, now I share your bot to folks.
And one other thing that it made me think, like, I remember, I think I was watching Zuckerberg talking about the metaverse and stuff, but people, when they use these avatars that were a different look or personality than them, like, it changed the perception a lot, even the way they behaved. And I think, like, if you could create a bot that looked and acted a little bit different from you, and the employer is not just judging you on like how you come off physically, because I think so many people win these interviews or they get the job in part because of how they come off physically, whereas this has now become less and less important in this remote world. So I think, like, for remote jobs, maybe you don't want to be too influenced by the way they look and the way they talk.
Yeah, it reminds me of like no photos on resume sort of like rule that a bunch of companies had as well. Like, you know, don't send the photo in. It's true. I think, like, when I'm thinking out loud about it, yeah, if you could just put one of these AI, I think like in Japan, this is like really big already. Like a lot of the streamers have their online versions, and this is a bit for security for what they do. But for this way, it could be like, you know, a set of 4 silhouettes, and then you choose which one you want. And that's about as much selection as you get.
Yeah, I could totally see that happening. I mean, I think more progressive companies will say, yeah, this is the way to go, right? We don't know who the person is. And then it's yeah. And then you also maybe don't know about the race of the person, age of the person. You can remove a lot of that stuff if the bot is not trained to disclose that data. And then you can't hold it against the person for not.
Last thought on that is, if you could somehow take data from the actual work that you're doing and the value it's created in the past, because that for me is like the black hole that nobody ever gets access to. Like, your performance is judged based on some reviews of people that they gave you and stuff. Whereas, like, if you could actually get the data on what you actually did in your previous jobs, that's, to me, really powerful.
Earlier, Suga and I were talking about like a designer role, right? And they were like, oh, we want to see portfolio. And this goes to your point, Ken, like, hey, Like for certain roles, it'll be easier to do it, or for writing a piece of code, or basically showing a design or things like that, like from pre-work and just walking you through that. That could be really fascinating to see that work. And I think like in terms of like employers, it just goes down to whoever has more leverage in the relationship. So like Suga said, like if the employer is thinking like, hey, I'm Goldman and I don't need to talk to a bot, then perhaps they're not going to be there. But if they really want to pull the top producer at JP Morgan, like, and that guy has a bot on or girl has a bot on, like, of course, like that would be perfectly fine. So I think like it comes down to leverage over here. Because the tangential idea to this is then what happens to Tinder, Bumble, and everything else? Like, I could do the same thing now for dating now. And it's like, hey, instead of swiping right now, basically just I can get to speak to this person and there's like no strings attached.
Yeah. And can you imagine if Goldman has to like convince a bot so that the candidate will do a live interview as the next step? Like, speak to my bot first. If my bot likes you, then I'll meet with you in person. That would be fun. I mean, because that's what happens now on the other side, right? Like a candidate has to speak to an employer's bot and convince the bot that, you know, they are worthy of the employer's like actual time.
I think like tools like HeyGen and everything like that are out there to get the thing in. I think the interviewing and feeding it data and the training part is going to be the one where to be able to answer questions which are outside of the scope, like, hey, could you tell me a time when this happened and there is nothing to fill in that gap, that, you know, the bot has to basically then, or then you get feedback back. Like, hey, in this interview, 7 questions were asked, 5 of them were answerable, 2 of them I couldn't answer. You might want to fill this in. And then with more training data, you'll just get a better and better bot over time. And that's why you would subscribe to a plan to make your bot better, because you could do the one-off per meter billing, but then you don't improve your bot on that. And if you subscribe to the version where you get feedback on every interview, that would be the reason why you would pay 10, 20, 30 bucks a month, because then your bot would become much, much better and become super sticky then, because your bot could be used for so many things then. No, that was awesome. Thanks for sharing. And I love the fact that, you know, most of these AI has been a big theme on the show so far, and for correct reason. These are all use cases that were probably sci-fi only a little while ago, and now very, very possible to pull off. All right, Ken. So that was idea number 1, and you're on with idea number 2 now.
Sure. My ideas, I call it negotiate for me. I was watching Andrew Wilkinson, the head of Tiny Capital. I've seen him on podcasts a number of times. He was on the Greg Eisenberg show, and he was talking about how he negotiates for stuff all the time, and he wished that the people in his companies did it more because there's so much value that can be reaped. So when I was thinking about that, I was thinking how that applies to situations, and I totally agree. Like, I think many folks don't negotiate enough, and even when they do, they don't negotiate very well. And part of that I boil down to not knowing that you could negotiate something, not knowing how much value you think could be reaped, and therefore assuming that it's not very much, right? And not knowing how to go about it. So this is where I thought it would be interesting to plug in AI. And I was thinking about, with a client, we subscribed to HubSpot a few months ago and we were negotiating a bit. And it would have been great to just be able to ask AI, okay, for this number of people, this kind of license, give me what I should aim for as a good price. It tells me, hey, you could probably save another 30%. And then if I want, I could even find someone who's an expert negotiator that steps in, pretends like he's in my company and negotiates from there on out to get the 30%. That would be something that I think a lot of people would. And then the way that the business makes money, so the expert negotiators are kind of a network and they just make a percentage of savings. And then we as the platform make, say, 5% of savings. And so we'd have to save like $20 million to get $1 million of revenue.
I guess the question I have for you is, at what point do you bring in that negotiator, and at what point does it undermine the team that's making the decision, right? And then in negotiation, you always got to have like the price at which you walk away. So if they know you're not going to walk away, you use all of your leverage. If a party that's not going to be impacted by that decision is in charge of negotiating, doesn't that skew kind of the incentives a little bit?
I agree. I think for me, there's different kinds of negotiations. There's like business deals where one party's going to walk away. But then there's like SaaS and things where if a person has negotiated a whole bunch of HubSpot deals in the past, he knows HubSpot's not going to walk away. He knows that this other company got this other prize. So maybe it also takes a call on that. Like, hey, yeah, this is a dangerous negotiation. We'll help advise you, but you're going to take the decision. Whereas like on a HubSpot deal, like we'll just negotiate it for you.
You know where I've been forced into these situations is with very dodgy tools and subscriptions like Times or HBS or stuff like that, where they just don't have a cancel button on their subscription. So in order to cancel, you've got to message someone and basically either email or chat. And I invariably get into these chats and say, hey, I want to cancel my account. Why are you canceling? I don't use this enough. And then they always just say like, would you want to stay if we give you a 50% discount to the next year? And I was like, so if that workflow only works, I don't know, like, when there's no cancel button, a lot of people don't even want to go through the hassle of that. And I don't even know whether that works in the long term because it destroys customer trust. But seeing what both of you were talking about, like, I can clearly see that if that's something that I could very easily pull up and be like, hey, my AWS billing has gone crazy like this, and I want to get a discount on certain reserved instances. AWS is probably not going to negotiate, but maybe ClickUp or Jira or something like that. I'm pretty sure these guys are always cutting deals at the back and giving you a discount code if you ask them to.
Yeah, I agree. And I think those are a lot easier and like saves money without too much risk. Whereas like if you're going to use this thing to negotiate your salary for a job, like that is a high risk one.
I think there are a lot of these sites, right? They give you like the coupon codes and you can like test out what the coupon codes work. So for more like small ticket items, I suppose it's already there. There's no negotiation as such. But for big deals, it's I could see how if you brought in a specialist who knew that product and was like, I know what the best deal is. I mean, it's almost like you don't even need them to negotiate for you, right? You just need them to give you insight into how HubSpot had negotiated these deals before. So I remember at one company where I'm a director, we were trying to negotiate a SaaS platform, and then we found out from our competitors what they were paying. And then when we walked into the negotiation, it was very clear, like, we know you've given a lower number to one of our competitors. Like, we're not paying you anything more than that number.
Yeah, I agree. I've seen a few instances where I thought someone was a very bad or negative negotiator. Like their stance was very negative on the other party. So like in those instances, maybe it is good to replace them. But yeah, I think most people, if you give them the information, they're good to go.
But I guess this is also kind of why companies have like procurement teams, right? Like one division procures everything because all negotiators are meant to be there. And so the folks that are kind of down the line doing the work, now don't have to take the negotiation responsibility onto themselves, which they invariably won't. And so, so maybe what you want to do is have like an outsourced procurement team.
What do you call that? One of the other areas where I see this, which is a pain to negotiate with, is on Alibaba when you are doing it. You have to open a bunch of chats and then you got to talk to a bunch of people about like, hey, I need to get this product. And then just negotiating one versus the other. Like, again, it's like, could be a chatbot in this case. But if the chatbot already has like an idea as to how much these products usually cost and things like that, massive advantage for people. Especially, I know some of our e-com businesses are buying from Alibaba quite a bit. And whenever we look for new vendors, it's always a pain in the butt to get this done. And that could be like an easy-ish use case whereby it's not as critical, but it's not as straightforward as like getting like 20% off on a monthly fee or something, because there's volumes to be played over there. There's different packaging. There are different variables that you could work with on these e-com ones that could be interesting. And even the slightest of margin savings on that have massive impact on downstream sort of like impacts for the e-com businesses, which usually run on thinner margins as well. I haven't watched that episode yet, but I've seen Andrew talk about the service quite a bit. And I think he actually launched a service to do this, but I think now with AI, I think it's just going to enable it a lot more, because last time he was hiring a whole bunch of people to do this for you on your behalf. And so they were like, if you're not spending like $100,000 a month on AWS, then, we can't really negotiate for you. But if you spend more than this much, then we can definitely help you. All right. So that's AI negotiator as idea number 2. And now, Suga, on to your second idea.
All right. My second idea is really simple. I actually don't know why, someone hasn't done it, or maybe people have done it, but just not to scale. A service that helps seniors become more tech savvy. So, I know, my own parents, uncles, aunties, lots of folks who, struggle with tech, and, they're often relying on some kind soul to help them use like their iPhone, help them use Canva, help them to use different apps. I personally found myself teaching my father-in-law how to use ChatGPT, and he's so excited by it. But, I feel like there is a gap here. Right? I think what has happened is the senior folks, because they're no longer earning, they have a lot of wealth, but they're no longer earning. They're not really like a target for a lot of businesses. But then it's likely that something exists out there, but I haven't seen something, just a basic hotline that will connect you to someone who very kindly talk you through and entertain all your customer service, all your questions in a non kind of, here's the script of what I'm going to say. Like it's got to be very highly service oriented. It can even visit you at home. And I feel like people will be willing to pay for that. A lot of senior folks will be willing to pay for that.
Well, as someone who is designated as the IT person in their household, I regularly get this message. So if I could reroute that message somewhere else, that would be highly appreciated. It's like, Usman, I'm not being able to log in over here. Or how did this picture come up over here? I did not post it. And then you go and you start to figure out like what happened. And then it's like, send me a screenshot of this or that. So I think there's one part which is like diagnosing issues. The other part, like you mentioned, which is definitely leveling up your parents and certain sort of like tools that they use. I think invariably, I wonder like the genius bars and things like that at Apple come to mind. I just wonder from a price mechanic, like for your father-in-law, I wonder whether he would have paid someone like $20 an hour to teach him though.
I mean, I think if the results are there, right? If they're going to use the tool and they're going to use it properly, I think, yeah, they would pay because they have money, right? These are folks who are sitting on money. What they don't have is time. So you're basically now trying to like help them make the most of their time, ironically enough. So they would rather give up money to get back more time and make the most of kind of their remaining years. And if, they can do that, if they can lead kind of richer life with tech, which arguably they will be able to. And my sense is they'll spend on it, right? But I think it has to be kind of, so you're right, the two parts. So diagnosing stuff, maybe they're less inclined to pay for. I think it's almost like a way to get them to the leveling up stuff. So I think the leveling up, if you think about how you can teach them things that are useful to them, I suspect they'll pay for it. And especially if you include them in like a community of other seniors, this is what they want in their kind of twilight years.
I definitely agree. My mom is a great example, and her husband, they're around 80 years old. I'm always so impressed with like how many perceived viruses they managed to get. Like I've never gotten a virus in like 20 years, but like my mom will be like, yeah, I got a virus like every 3 to 6 months. And she's got a guy that she always has come over and fixes her computer. And yeah, like she's got all these random, like, so what her trigger is less about learning and it's always some kind of problem with her computer, but she spends money and she made some relationship with some tech support guy that like worked for a company of some things she was using, and then she just made a deal with him like, hey, whenever I have a problem, would you mind coming over? Yeah, I've seen this, and I think there's definitely an opportunity there, and people are not looking at this.
There was a company called Tech Geeks or something like that. I knew an Australian company called Geeks on Tap or some stuff like that, but I think they just go too up sort of like market and far more complicated issues. I think what we're talking about over here are simpler issues. I just wonder, like, again, the reason why it doesn't sort of like get catered for, I think it just comes down to price demand sort of like ratio. But if you can make the fact that, person is facing X problem and now an AI agent to someone can actually help diagnose and solve that problem for them, because I think many of these issues can be resolved, and with enough information given, that could be something that could be done. I get most of the calls on the diagnosing part. The learning new stuff, like when I taught also a bunch of people how to use GPT or how to use some of the design tools, that's really, I don't know, from my point of view, I get a lot less requests personally from there. I get most of my requests from the problem side. And it's usually not very difficult to solve, but it takes time. And it's either we use low-level tech support to solve for these on an hourly rate, which would be very low, or then we try to figure out a way as to how we can potentially get an AI agent to solve for it.
Yeah. I suspect you would need to be a human being because, if the seniors are already so daunted by like technology and then you send them a chatbot, I feel like they'll just go nuts. I think this is kind of a business where, all right, you got to brand yourself as like, we help senior citizens with tech. And then your workers are going to be kind of like students, people who have like a bit of spare time, might enjoy talking to an old person, has the patience most of all. I don't think it can be like maybe a full-time job per se.
Yeah, I can definitely see that.
One thing I was reading about just today, I think, was that Claude was working on this technology, or Anthropic, the company behind Claude, was working on this technology that reads your hardware. So like it knows everything that's going on in your overall computer, which is kind of the logical next step that a lot of AI, I think, is moving towards. But I think once the AI really understands what's happening on the screen, what applications you have open, what is the problem you're facing, it doesn't seem to me like too huge of a step, from my mom to say, why is this thing not opening? And then if the computer could just go and fix it on its own, like that would be the ideal.
How do you guys feel about that though? Like there's a company called Rewind, I think rewind.com or Rewind app, where essentially it takes all your keystrokes, it takes everything that you've looked at, and then you can just prompt it and say like, hey, 3 weeks ago, I was talking to Ken and Suga about like, this old folks sort of like tech service. Can you pull up the transcript of that conversation? And it goes and pulls up the transcript. Like, would you guys be okay with something like that running even if everything was just not sent to the cloud and on your machine?
I would personally be okay with that. I mean, I would actually like that kind of service. Maybe it's because I don't feel like I'm doing anything that's so sensitive. But yeah, personally, I'd be pretty happy with that. I actually even like that because I find kind of the bots that come into the calls a little annoying. So if something's kind of recording in the background and it serves me, even better.
Yeah, the whole bunch of privacy stuff. But because if that file exists somewhere on your computer and your computer gets nicked or hacked or stuff like that, like there's some security implications, but I'm sure you can encrypt that somewhere. And then if it is, because I do think that's the next step, like Ken was saying, like it just listens to everything.
I would say like, I think a lot of people would definitely want to be able to pause it. Like they're going to watch porn and like pause. But yeah.
Someone was telling me that like right now our phones have the ability to listen to every email we're saying. And someone was telling me that, notice how if you like talk about something and then you'll see ads for that thing pop up, even though you didn't actually type anything. Maybe this is like a larger conspiracy, but I think a lot of people already believe that big tech is listening to everything that we're saying and doing anyways. And so now you just have a little bit more. You have like a copy of that for your own purposes.
Yeah, well, that does exist. Like, I think like a lot of these apps, when you give them background permission running, are able to pick up that thing. So for people like, just look at the apps and figure out who's running in the background. And most of the time you will find all of the Instagrams and the Facebooks running in the background. And they have like a whole bunch of
companies, the data AI, Sensor Tower, I think those guys, that's how their entire business is made, by listening to what you're doing, reading what you're doing.
I think ignorance is bliss in this sort of like place as well, where you don't know, like when you become like more aware of it, like if Facebook would say like, hey, by the way, we listen to everything that you do. I think like it's one of the reasons why I think the Alexa things have that mute button on top of them as well. But I mean, essentially that's just listening to everything. And I think like there was this leak of a conversation that once happened, like it sent the conversation to someone else. And I was like, oh my God. Would I give up the Alexa thingies though? But I don't know. They're pretty deeply embedded into my house. So it's like you have to give up some stuff to get some stuff. And you got to figure out whether that trade-off is good enough for you. All right. So that was a fun idea. Thanks, Suga. Those were two really interesting ideas that had a lot of conversation around them. I'm going to close off with a quick idea that I also heard. Like there were two things that came to mind. Gary Tan on Twitter said like, listen, I get too many crank calls and too many people that want to get a hold of me. Can someone build a AI receptionist that would pick up all my calls, screen them, and if it's really important, push them through? I had seen versions of this being built, but it made me think about this company, which is a really old company called Ruby Virtual Assistants. And the URL is ruby.com, and they started in 2003 and were one of the first virtual receptionist companies to be out there. And they would, back in the day when people would call companies, they would expect someone to answer the phone. And these people would just route the phone calls for you. Now, Ruby became like a massive business. Today, it still operates and it makes over $100 million a year because it's somehow over all of these years figured out how to reach middle America SME companies. And the cost on average for a Ruby virtual assistant to pick up your calls is between $3.50 to $4 per minute. So the idea that I have today is an idea called Echodesk, which is not going to target every SME. I think like in the portfolio where a lot of people want to call people, but they don't necessarily have the bandwidth, is e-com companies. So I would like specifically target D2C e-com companies with a service that would put a phone number somewhere prominently on the website and say, hey, you could call us if you have a problem with your order, you want to find out about your order and you don't want to figure that out. This would be great because I think a lot of customers want to call their companies, especially where they bought stuff from, but companies don't want to give the number because, they don't want to apply to people like Ruby, which are expensive, or hire their own people. So now you just have this AI layer, which will accept the phone calls. We charge them somewhere like 50 cents a minute for calls. And if there's something that the AI can't handle, then there could be a handoff to a human, as we've discussed in several of the ideas before. For a little less than like $1,000 a month, all these companies would have these receptionists and customer support or whatever you want picking up the phone. And you need like 80 e-com companies to build $1 million business over here. If on average they're spending $1,000 a month on this. Yeah, that's what I saw. And I think like could be something which, again, all the tech is for. I think reaching your customers and convincing them of the use case is the hardest part over here because the tech is probably the easiest part in this idea other than reaching these D2C e-com companies and pitching this to them. So that's my idea.
it's kind of like, now we're already being greeted by bots, right? Like press 1, press 2. So this would just kind of be maybe more natural. Okay, so there's the press 1, press 2, and then now they already say, please say yes, no. So there are, even before AI, it's already starting to become more human-like. How do you imagine, like, this business is going to be different from just the non-AI but pretty advanced versions that exist out there?
Yeah, when I've seen some of the tools that we've been experimenting with these SDRs that are calling people now, the fidelity is becoming better and better with every single passing month. So I imagine someone calling and someone saying, hello, welcome to Baby Planet. How can I help you today? And then they said, listen, I have order number XYZ that I need help with, and I haven't received it yet. And then this thing can be plugged into most of your tools. And it's going to be able to say like, oh, I can see that it's been delayed. One of your products was missing, blah, blah, blah. And it has like all the contextual information, but you're speaking to someone so that you don't have to go through these really complicated telephone trees, which basically end up in dead ends most of the time, because those are infuriating. Whenever I have to pick up the phone and I get one of those trees, it's basically, there's a website on the internet which says like, for all these American companies, whenever you hit that tree, just type this number sequence and you'll get to the right person. But I imagine full voice fidelity, like you're speaking to a person, and you could inbuilt personality into that person as well.
Yeah, I think my experience with the automated voice systems is I'm willing to do it until it's bad. And same with like online chatbots. So the minute I ask something and it gives me some like wrong response, I'm just going to keep yelling, like, let me talk to a person. So, so I think, I think a lot depends on like how good it is answering those questions.
Imagine if the bot was so intelligent and it said, we're sorry we're making you angry, Ken. Please bear with us. Maybe you should take a few deep breaths.
The online chatbots say stuff like that. Like I'll like yell because it'll like apologize. But it's so annoying when it does that. Yeah.
It's like, relax, we're getting
I think
help.
one challenge for this business is going to be the kids that are kind of growing up now or even those who are in their 20s now, they're so used to social media. Nobody wants to pick up a phone and talk to anybody. They just want to chat. They want to chat away, so they'll DM and chat. They really don't want to jump on a call. So I think the future of customer service is also going to be very different, right? That hotline will always exist, but I think companies are also making them more and more and more inefficient to disincentivize people from using them. I actually think this is happening. They don't want people to use the bot, the hotline, and so they're like, yeah, you're not going to get results here. So keep looking through all of our manuals and processes and FAQs. So you're likely to find a better answer there.
You're absolutely right. And so I almost think about like, when we think about companies as a whole now, that, there's a lot less contact with the company. There's the branding of the company. And then, that's about it, because you can't really get in touch with anyone at the company. I wonder on the flip side, whether not using AI bots, but in the future, like the famous stories with Zappos, right? Like most call centers had like call limits, like you were graded on how quickly and how many calls you could get through. And Zappos turned this on their head and said, like, stay as long as you want. We don't track you on that, but it's the scores. They had like a record, like a customer was on a Zappos call for 8 hours or something, because they were just talking about whatever was happening in their life. But it makes me wonder, like, the more that we lose the human touch, the more that's probably going to get more valued eventually. But like you said, maybe this time it might be a bit different, given that all of this generation has grown up without something called a phone call. Like they don't make phone calls, like you said. So I wonder how the interaction changes, but it's an interesting sort of like twist. I didn't think about the demographic.
Maybe it's kind of creating a bot that will make phone calls cool again. You know how like in Singapore, there's this brand called Haidilao, Lao, and they've just made steamboat or like hot pot culture so cool that people go just for the experience. And the food is probably just average. So maybe, your bot will make phone calls cool again for the Gen Z.
Yeah, because I think Heidi Lau is a really good example of like, yeah, you can bring certain things back. They've expanded and become a really big business now based around that. But I think like the future of businesses then become more bespoke, right? Like if everyone can stitch together a business with 7 AI agents and a few lines of code, which is done through Cursor and stuff, then it's going to be the differentiation. I think that's just another fascinating topic where you have lots of smaller businesses, which are then higher value. And we've seen this when you see like jewelry companies, tailoring companies, and a lot of these other very bespoke companies, which don't necessarily scale to that level, but can charge a heavy premium. And I think like we're going to probably see those research back up because you probably get a lot more people making a lot more money, and then they'll probably want these very bespoke type experiences that will become in vogue again.
Yeah, I saw one really good example of this with Go High Level. High Level is like a marketing automation sales tool, but their customer support approach was so interesting because you click on a Zoom call and then a real operator gets on and you see all the other people that are waiting. And if you wanted, you could even like chat with them. And then they send you to a room. But like the whole time that you're waiting, like you're chatting with other people and hearing other people chat, which I thought was weird, but I kind of liked it. And it just like gave you like real human interaction the whole time.
No, that's awesome, right? Like it's completely like switching the script on its head now. I've never heard of that before, but I'm definitely going to look that up because that just sounds like an interesting experience for people to be like, hey, you put into a Zoom room together.
That's what it was like in the old days, right? You know, when you're being left on hold, like you will hear like all the people talking in the background while like somebody else takes their call. Because literally somebody else would have to walk to the telephone before like the phone call could be transmitted over. So
cool. All right. So that's a wrap on the fourth idea. AI remains a heavy sort of like theme, but I think like what's really interesting about like incorporating this into the thing is that so many businesses are going to change. And I thought that's why also Ken and I thought like this was a good time because there are all these ideas and we get to discuss them. And it's actually just a lot of fun as well. Thank you so much, Suga, for coming on and sharing 2 awesome ideas with us. I hope that someone, at least in the audience, picks up solving elder care tech problems because that would help a lot of us who seem to be in like this Gen Y generation because we're getting absolutely slammed with it. But yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me, Usman. Ken.
Yeah, it was
a
awesome.
fun conversation.